Hello everybody, this is the second part of some tips to prepare and to study for the course CHEM 1061. What we will be looking at today are some specific tips to prepare and take exams throughout the course and for the final exam as well. The key features to take and prepare exams are summarized here. We need to get familiar with the exam styles. In this particular case, those styles prepared by myself in section 3 of CHEM 1061. Practice answering multiple choice and open questions, which are the preferred question styles for the midterms and the final exam. Identify your personal limitations and have a strategy to take exams. So we're going to go through each of these bullet points one by one to illustrate some examples and provide some hints that are specific to these particular situations. So let's begin by talking about how to get familiar with exam styles. The rationale to do that is that when you get to the exam, you want to minimize time spent on understanding how the exam works and what the components of the test will be. So the first thing to do that I recommend to do is to review the first and last page of the exam. This includes the instructions, information, and formulas that are provided to facilitate the performance of the exam, and the periodic table that is found at the end of the exam. So an example of how you will look or what will find or look for that information is shown here. On the left side of this slide, we see a typical page of an exam. This was given to my section last year, and you can see that this particular page has several components. The upper part consists of instructions. Make sure that you are familiar with your X500, which is the first part of your email. The second part of this first page is useful information that consists of tables such as the solubility products, the activity series, some common ions, and even some molecular weights. Not included in this first page are common formulas that could help you solve some of the problems as well. The last page of the exam consists of a periodic table. Even though a periodic table is a standard way to communicate and catalog chemical information, styles vary from table to table. So it's important to get familiar where to find the groups, the different periods, the different elements, for instance, manganese. Find as well their atomic number, like 25, and their atomic mass, like 54.94. All of this information is available in the Moodle site prior to the exam, typically about 1 week ahead of the exam. So you might get familiar with that and practice your exercises, etc., working with these materials as well. The second part that can help you get familiar with exam styles is where you're going to be recording your answers. In this course, we record our answers in a bubble sheet. A bubble sheet consists of an introduction that has your name, your last name, your first name, and then again your X500, which is different from your student ID. It's very important to include this X500 because this allows us to match your responses to your specific email address and to your records. As you enter any information here, you need to match either the alphanumeric characters, either letters or numbers down the column. For this, you will need to use a lead pencil that is dark enough so that it can be read by a machine that we call a Scantron. We don't grade multiple choice questions using manual grading. We use this machine that allows us to, almost without making any mistakes, to have the answers to you or your results of your test fairly quickly after you have taken the exam. In addition to the exam bubble sheet, it's important to have a look at previous exams. These exams will give you an idea of the flavor of questions that you may find in the exam that you will be taking this year. Some examples of these questions are indeed multiple choice questions that require not only the calculations that you might be having practice doing in the course already, but some questions that relate to molecular depictions or atomic depictions, such as this question that is shown here, which is from a previous test. Other multiple choice questions are related to chemical reactions and applying concepts, like in this particular example, this tests the concept of ionic equation, a total ionic equation. And in addition to multiple choice questions, it is common in the midterms to include 1 or 2 open questions. Those questions require you to draw or sometimes make calculations and report a written answer to that, or report a drawing on your question, such as the ones that are here below, 19 and 20, that requires drawing 2 formula units of aluminum nitrate and 3 formula units of calcium sulfide, and then use that to do some calculations. Okay, so that's what, this information again is going to be posted in the Moodle site ahead of the exam so that you have an idea of what sort of questions to expect. It's strongly advised not to use the previous exams as the primary source for studying. We change course contents and prioritize course contents in each year. So if you study with a previous year exam, you might be doing yourself a disservice because you might not be studying the correct information. We are going to move on to another topic that is very important to prepare for the exam, and that is practice answering multiple choice and open questions. One of the goals to use CHEM in this course is that you get to experience the type of environment, the type of questions that you will be observing and sensing when you are in an exam. So multiple choice questions posted through CHEM during the lecture times are an excellent example of how you should be practicing your exams and answering your questions. If you cannot answer the questions in the given time in class, this suggests that something needs to be changed in that regard. Also, we have a suggested list of problems in the textbook. It's important to make sure you practice some of those, that you get familiar with that, and you think about not only as the answer being right or wrong, but also what are the difficult components in those questions and what are the challenges that you experience when you're trying to answer these problems. Even if you answer the questions correctly, it's a very good idea to try to understand what are the areas of solving a problem or answering a question that give you more difficulty. And that brings us to the next topic, which is identify personal limitations. Why don't I get an answer right when I'm trying to solve a problem in class, or when I'm studying in ALEX, or when I'm practicing exercises in the textbook? Sometimes if we answer this question on a regular basis, we can get a better understanding what our current limitations are and work on those, so that when it's time to apply chemistry or do chemistry later on in a test situation or any other situation, the limitations are going to be non-present or handled in a proper way. So let's see some typical answers when I ask these questions to students. One of them, some of the typical answers is, I have not understood the concept. That means that it's important to review concepts. If I knew that was happening, I could potentially study more that topic ahead of time. Sometimes I freeze and I'm not able to think when I look at the test. These situations could be very traumatic for some students, and for some people, it's very important to think about whether it's important to reach out to other resources, such as the Disability Resource Center, that can help us understand whether it's important to have perhaps a more suitable environment to take tests. Not knowing where to start. Sometimes we see there are 20 questions, I have only 60 minutes. It's very difficult to know where to start. So it's important to define a strategy that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes as well. Not reading questions carefully. Sometimes we want to rush through the exam and we miss a key information on the question, and that also can cause problems. So that means that we have to pay more attention to that as well. Rushing to an answer. Sometimes we feel overconfident that we know how to solve a problem, and we may neglect that the units that we have are not the correct units, and we get the incorrect answer in the test. Another typical answer that I get when I ask why I don't get the questions, you didn't get the questions right. Sometimes I get to hear that there's not enough time to think about a question. And that's very important to consider when we are planning how to take a test, because some questions may take much longer than others in terms of answering the questions. And finally, it's very common to hear that the problem has been that the calculations were were giving a problem because silly mistakes doing these calculations. So again, if that's an issue, it's important to find strategies that would help us address these particular issues, such as doing calculations twice or doing calculations backwards. Okay, so if we are aware of these personal limitations, hopefully before we take a test, we can work towards making them a non-issue when we are taking the test. So that leads us to how to have a strategy that can help us take exams. We know that we have only 60 minutes in this particular section of CHEM 1061. We know that we're going to have 20 questions. So we know that on average, we're going to have about 3 minutes per question. So considering the time that we have available per question and the personal limitations, we can formulate a strategy that can help us be more successful at answering questions and do better in the course. For instance, if one of the issues that I have is that I do not read questions carefully and get nervous by the end of the exam, maybe I can decide when I would like to read the long and ambiguous questions that I find in a test. This could be done, for example, after I build confidence answering some of the initial questions that usually are at the beginning of the test. So if I consciously go to a test thinking about my strategy, it's guaranteed that while I feel more comfortable and do well when I take a test. I hope that these tips are useful in taking the tests throughout this course and the final exam. Good luck.